If you're waking up today, looking at your phone, and feeling this sudden urge to just throw it into the nearest body of water, I completely understand.
Oh, absolutely. It's a lot.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, the news cycle right now is just relentless. You are out there trying to manage your own life, your job, your grocery bill, and meanwhile, the headlines are just screaming at you from every possible direction.
Yeah, it feels incredibly chaotic. And, more than anything, it feels disconnected.
Exactly. Disconnected. But that is exactly why we are here today. We are going to cut through that noise. We are taking a deep dive into the Daily Tech Reader 6 a.m. news brief from today, July 29th, 2026.
And this brief, it is a dense, intense compilation. It covers everything from geopolitics and global markets to tech, public health, and climate.
Yeah, it spans essentially the entire spectrum of human infrastructure and activity all at once.
It really does.
And the mission for our deep dive today, the specific lens we want you to look through as we pull this apart, is this concept of compounding interconnected risks.
Right, because absolutely nothing we are about to talk about exists in a vacuum.
Exactly. We want to show you how a physical missile interception on one side of the planet directly alters the cost of borrowing money in your specific neighborhood, which in turn is currently threatening the biggest artificial intelligence tech boom in history.
It is all tethered together.
We are going to reveal the hidden architecture driving today's global events. And just as a quick note, before we dive into the geopolitical movements, especially regarding the Middle East and the meetings in Washington, we want to remind you that we are here to unpack the facts and ideas as presented in the brief. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints.
Right, we're just looking at the mechanics of what is happening.
Purely the mechanics. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to understand the architecture of these compounding risks, we really have to start at the physical foundation, which today is kinetic conflict.
We're starting with the most immediate, visceral events in the brief. So over in the Middle East, any brief tentative pause in direct hostilities is officially over.
Yeah, this situation escalated fast.
U.S. military forces intercepted multiple Iranian ballistic missiles that were launched toward American forces. And in response, U.S. and Saudi aircraft conducted strikes against logistics and weapon sites operated by Iran-backed militias in eastern Iraq.
And according to the brief, those retaliatory strikes were the direct result of, I think it was more than 30 militia drone attacks over just the previous 72 hours.
Over 30 attacks. Wow. And we are looking strictly at the facts on the ground here, and the reality is that the situation is escalating so rapidly that the immediate casualty is the diplomatic effort to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, which means commercial passage through the strait remains severely restricted.
Instantly, the price of oil shot up by more than 3%.
Yep.
And this isn't just a number on a screen. When that strait is restricted, the entire calculus of global shipping changes overnight.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that 3% bump in oil is just the surface-level symptom. The deeper issue is the immense friction this adds to the global logistics system.
Because ships literally have to go around.
Exactly. When ships can't safely navigate the Strait of Hormuz, they have to reroute. And a reroute can add weeks to a journey, which requires burning exponentially more fuel, which in turn drives up maritime insurance premiums to just astronomical levels.
So the cost of moving anything goes up.
Right. You are suddenly looking at shipping costs on some routes becoming multiples higher than they were a year ago. That friction translates directly into persistent inflation.
And while all this physical conflict and logistical chaos is happening, the political maneuvering to address it is occurring in a highly unusual setting. The brief details how political and military leaders gathered in Washington for the funeral of Senator Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, that was a really fascinating detail.
Right. But on the sidelines of this memorial, you have major geopolitical negotiations happening. President Trump met separately with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss Iran and regional security.
And then he also met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yes, to discuss reviving negotiations with Russia, as well as a proposed agreement that would allow Ukraine to manufacture Patriot missile interceptors domestically.
It just highlights how the machinery of global power has to keep operating, no matter the context. A solemn memorial service becomes the physical hub for discussions that could fundamentally shape the next decade of military strategy and defense manufacturing.
It's wild. But let's bring this back to the economic fallout, right to the desk of Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh.
Right, because the Fed is concluding its policy meeting today.
And thinking about the Fed's job right now, it feels like trying to smoothly drive a car down the highway. But geopolitical crises keep like teleporting to the passenger seat and randomly slamming the brakes and the gas at the exact same time.
That is a perfect way to put it. They are dealing with violently conflicting signals. You have persistent inflation being fed by those energy and shipping pressures from the Middle East. Then on the other hand, you have financial markets flashing major warning signs.
The brief notes that while an immediate rate increase isn't expected today, U.S. 30-year Treasury yields are sitting above 5%. So I want to push back on the timeline here. Is a 3% bump in oil just a temporary daily blip that traders will forget by Friday? Or does this fundamentally break the Federal Reserve's inflation math?
It absolutely breaks the math.
Really? Just from that?
Yeah, because it forces the Fed into a defensive posture. When inflation remains persistent due to these geopolitical supply shocks, the Federal Reserve has to keep money expensive to cool down demand in the economy.
Okay, that makes sense.
A 5% yield on a 30-year Treasury isn't just a government finance statistic. It is the gravitational pull for the entire economy. It sets the absolute floor for every other interest rate.
Meaning if the government is paying 5%, any riskier entity has to pay even more to attract capital.
That is the mechanism. It means higher mortgage rates for you, higher interest on auto loans, and crucially, crippling borrowing costs for corporations trying to build new infrastructure. What those regional militias have demonstrated over the last 72 hours is that they possess the leverage to disrupt the global supply chain, which fuels inflation, which forces the Fed to keep rates high. They are indirectly but forcefully influencing the cost of capital for everyone.
Which brings us to a massive systemic collision. Because when money becomes that expensive to borrow, the things that rely heavily on cheap debt start to buckle.
And right now, that is the AI sector.
Yes, that high cost of capital is suddenly threatening what looked like an unstoppable juggernaut, the AI tech bubble. We are witnessing a massive tech reckoning in today's brief, and the numbers coming out of the Asian semiconductor markets are just staggering.
We are looking at a profound shift in market psychology playing out in real time.
The South Korean KOSPI index plummeted more than 11%. I mean, it was so severe it triggered a temporary trading halt. Taiwan's index dropped around 5%. Japan's Nikkei fell 2.6%. But here is the stat that completely stunned me.
The SK Hynix one.
Yes. SK Hynix, a massive memory chip maker, saw its shares drop by 9%. But they dropped 9% despite the company reporting that their operating profit increased by more than 550% from the previous year.
Yeah, it sounds crazy.
Wait, I mean, so their profits grew by 550% and the market punished them with a 9% stock drop. How is that mathematically or psychologically possible?
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of valuation versus reality. The current stock prices of these semiconductor companies aren't grounded in what they are earning today, even if today's earnings are phenomenal.
So what are they grounded in?
They are built on discounted cash flow models that price in a flawless hyper-growth trajectory stretching years into the future.
So the market had already baked a miracle into the stock price, and a 550% increase was basically just meeting the bare minimum expectation.
Exactly. Investors are suddenly waking up to the distinction between the actual real-world demand for AI, which is undeniably growing, and the astronomical premium they've already paid for that growth.
That is a huge disconnect.
It is. If your stock valuation fundamentally requires a 1,000% increase in profit to make mathematical sense, a 550% increase triggers a massive sell-off. And the reason expectations were so high in the first place brings us right back to the borrowing costs we just discussed.
Because building the physical infrastructure for artificial intelligence is not a cheap endeavor.
Not at all. It is capital intensive on a historic, almost unprecedented scale. We are talking about building data centers that require gigawatts of continuous power, advanced cooling systems, and massive real estate footprints.
And this is where the financial engineering behind this boom starts to look incredibly fragile.
Very fragile.
The brief gives a prime example of this engineering. NVIDIA is reportedly discussing a $250 billion financing guarantee for OpenAI, alongside up to $350 billion in future chip purchases.
Yeah, those numbers are just massive.
This feels entirely circular to me. It's like a casino lending a high roller millions of dollars, but the loan only happens if the high roller agrees to exclusively play at that specific casino's blackjack tables.
Which is exactly why Fitch, the credit rating agency, is calling this circular financing. And they've officially identified a major AI market correction, not just as a stock market issue, but as an emerging global credit risk.
So it's no longer just a tech sector problem, it's a lending system problem.
Let's break down the mechanics of why that matters. If a chip supplier guarantees a massive loan for a startup so that startup can buy the supplier's chips, it artificially inflates the supplier's sales numbers today.
But it comes with a catch.
Right, it buries massive debt and liability on the balance sheet for tomorrow. If the ultimate commercial returns of these AI projects are still several years away, which most analysts agree they are, and the baseline borrowing costs remain above 5% because of the geopolitical friction we discussed, you suddenly have a towering structure of debt that is incredibly expensive to service.
And the competitive pressure isn't letting up while they try to figure this out. The brief mentions China's CXMT just debuted in Shanghai, and there are reports of Chinese progress in domestic lithography.
Yeah, that strengthens their domestic AI supply chain and puts even more downward pressure on these towering Western valuations.
The central question for the AI sector today is no longer about consumer demand. The question is whether the actual earnings and cash flows can support this massive, debt-fueled capital structure built around it, especially when capital isn't cheap anymore.
Exactly.
So we have a geopolitical system that's overheating, which restricts global supply chains and overheats the economic system, which drives up borrowing costs and threatens to burst the technological system.
It's all connected.
But these digital and financial systems don't exist in the cloud. They exist on the ground. And the physical ground is showing the exact same systemic stress. Let's look at the climate and public health emergencies in this brief.
Yeah, we are watching the physical infrastructure of the planet buckle under compounding demands.
In Europe, France and Spain are preparing for yet another major heat wave. And the wildfires there are reaching a level of intensity that alters the local atmosphere. The heat and smoke from the Bordeaux area blaze are creating pyrocumulonimbus clouds.
Right, these fires are creating pyrocumulonimbus clouds, literal fire-breathing thunderstorms.
It sounds like science fiction.
It does, but it's real. The sheer thermal energy from the blaze forces hot air up so violently that it creates its own weather system. It generates gale-force winds and dry lightning strikes, which then shoot down and spark entirely new fires miles ahead of the main front.
It's apocalyptic. And at the exact same time this atmospheric anomaly is happening, the brief notes that France is implementing a ban on social media for kids under 15, and the fast fashion brand Shine is warning about new tariffs altering their ultra-low price shopping model.
The contrast there is just wild.
Right. You have literal firestorms generating their own lightning, and society is just awkwardly continuing alongside it, regulating TikTok and worrying about the price of cheap clothing.
The juxtaposition of mundane societal maintenance next to physical environmental collapse is striking.
And the climate issues are global. El Niño conditions are expected to strengthen rapidly. And here's where the systems collide again. Fitch, the very same agency warning about the AI debt bubble, has identified this strengthening El Niño as an emerging risk to sovereign and corporate credit.
Because a credit rating agency looks at severe weather mechanics as a massive economic liability.
How does that work in practice?
Well, El Niño shifts global precipitation. It causes droughts where there should be rain and floods where it should be dry. That physically destroys agricultural yields, washes out transportation corridors, and strains hydroelectric power grids.
I see.
Sovereign debt relies on a functioning taxable economy. If the weather breaks the supply chain, the ability to pay back debt drops.
And it doesn't stop at the weather grid. The public health grid is feeling simultaneously. In the United States, we have hit a 35-year high in measles cases. 2,318 cases so far.
That's a huge jump.
It is. National MMR vaccination coverage has slipped, falling below 90% in 16 different states.
Which is a mathematical threshold where herd immunity collapses. It's a completely preventable threat, re-emerging because of a breakdown in routine societal maintenance.
And alongside that old threat, we have a totally modern, complex logistical nightmare. Michigan is battling a mysterious outbreak of cyclosporiasis, with over 8,100 cases and 98 hospitalizations.
Yeah, that one is terrifying.
Federal investigators are scrambling across 4 new states, trying to trace, produce distribution records to find a shared supplier. But the biological mechanics of this infection make it incredibly difficult to track.
Because of the delay, right?
Yes, the symptoms are delayed by over a week. So by the time a patient is hospitalized, they can't accurately remember what specific produce they ate or where they bought it. The recall bias creates a massive blind spot for the investigators trying to map the supply chain.
That makes tracing it almost impossible.
Right. And looking at all of this, the fires, the outbreaks, the market crashes, it is so easy to read this brief and feel a profound sense of doom. But are we actually seeing a structural breakdown in our infrastructure? Or is this simply what it looks like when 8 billion people try to manage impossibly complex, overlapping systems in real time?
This raises an important question about the nature of the systems we have built. I
Right.
don't think it's necessarily a terminal breakdown, but it is a masterclass in the mechanics of feedback loops.
Feedback loops, meaning the system is basically feeding on its own momentum, like the AI debt cycle we just talked about.
Precisely. Let's look at the financial feedback loop first. AI companies need massive computing power, so they take on billions in debt guaranteed by the chip makers.
Right.
That drives the chip makers' valuations to unsustainable heights, which requires generating even more debt to maintain the illusion of infinite growth for the shareholders.
Okay, so that's the financial side.
Now, look at the physical feedback loop. A wildfire burns so hot it creates a localized storm system, which generates dry lightning, which strikes the ground and creates more fire.
And the terrifying part is how fragile both of those loops are to outside shocks.
Extremely fragile. And what the fish warnings show us is that global financial institutions no longer differentiate between the two. Climate change, severe weather patterns, and tech valuation bubbles are all categorized as systemic economic risks.
They all affect the bottom line.
Exactly. When El Nino disrupts the power grid in a major tech hub, it doesn't just ruin a farmer's crop. It shuts down the massive data center powering the AI, which immediately threatens the cash flow required to service that multi-billion-dollar circular loan. The risks compound each other.
The vulnerability in one sector is a vulnerability in all of them because we have wired them together.
We have optimized our global society for maximum efficiency and rapid financial returns, but the mechanical trade-off for that efficiency is that we've stripped away the buffers. We have removed the redundancies.
So there's no margin for error.
None. So when a geopolitical conflict flares up in the Middle East, the shockwave doesn't stay in the Middle East. It travels through the maritime shipping lanes, into the price of crude oil, into the Federal Reserve's inflation models, and eventually into the mortgage rate of a home buyer in Ohio and the operating budget of an AI startup in Silicon Valley.
Okay, let's take a breath and synthesize all of this. We started this deep dive looking at what felt like a fractured, chaotic news cycle. And what we've uncovered is a deeply tangled, causal web.
It really is a web.
We traced exactly how Iranian missiles and drone strikes in Iraq physically restrict the Strait of Hormuz, which spikes shipping costs and the price of oil. That persistent inflation forces the Federal Reserve to keep borrowing costs high, keeping 30-year Treasury yield sitting above a 5% floor.
And that floor changes everything.
Right. Those high borrowing costs are acting as a pin to the AI tech bubble, causing massive sell-offs in Asian markets because the staggering circular debt required to build these data centers suddenly looks incredibly difficult to pay back.
While the physical world burns.
Literally. And while the digital world faces a financial reckoning, the physical world is under immense strain, with European fires generating their own weather systems, while public health officials battle both ancient diseases like measles and complex modern food supply chain outbreaks across multiple states.
It is an immense amount of data to process.
It is. So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? Why should you care about a memory chip earnings report in South Korea or an El Nino credit warning in the Pacific?
Because it's your reality, too.
Because these sources prove that you are fundamentally tethered to this system. Your grocery bills, your job security in a tech-adjacent field, the air quality when you step outside your front door, none of it is isolated. The headlines aren't just stories happening to other people in distant places. They are the gears of the machine that you are living inside of every single day.
And if we want to look forward, there's one final provocative thought to consider here.
Okay, what is it?
Well, we are currently pouring hundreds of billions of dollars and accumulating massive global credit risk to build this unprecedented artificial intelligence infrastructure.
Right. The AI boom.
The implicit promise from the tech sector is that this superintelligence will eventually help us solve these impossibly complex overlapping crises. That AI will map the climate feedback loops, optimize the shipping routes around geopolitical conflicts, and trace the exact distribution of a cyclosporiasis outbreak across 4 states in a matter of seconds.
It sounds great in theory.
But here's the catch. AI doesn't magically exist in the cloud. It exists in massive, physically vulnerable, power-hungry data centers.
Right. Back to the physical infrastructure.
As weather events grow more extreme and energy grids become more strained by geopolitical shocks and natural disasters, are we actually creating our own massive fatal vulnerability? What happens to the artificial intelligence that is supposed to save us if the physical infrastructure required to power it simply fails first?
Wow. That is a question that is going to stick with me for a long time. It really flips the whole savior narrative of technology right on its head. And that is where we will leave it for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope we were able to cut through the noise and give you a clearer picture of the architecture behind today's headlines. Until next time, stay curious and keep connecting the dots.